apiary. This is one of the first ones I ever did. I did this way back in 13 and at the National Honey Show, and with 3 others. And when they got to YouTube, it was, my phone never stopped ringing. My email is plugged up all the time, but you know, it's actually my reward. So this is really what was my intention, to just promote what I do, and if it helps people, then that's what I'm asking for. That's all. So and let's see, let me go here. So I just like to let's see. Oh yeah, there we go. I'd like to I just say this is a quote from E.B. Wedmore, an English author. You probably all have heard of E.B. Wedmore, and this is really this is the crux of it. That nucleus colonies have so much vitality and strength, and they can be used in so many ways that they are the savior of the apiary, which is what I found, that they were the savior of my apiary. Okay, let's see. How can I get down? Next. How about that way? No, what's going on here? Why can't I? How about this one? Yes. So I asked you the question, are your bees alive in the spring? Or are they dead from so many different things? So this was a beautiful colony at one time. This is probably April. Brood rearing is starting to expand, and the colony runs out of honey stores and starves to death right at the beginning of the season, where this is probably would have been one of my best colonies, but through error, beekeeper error on my part, I never gave them enough, ensured they have enough winter stores, and the colony died. And then there's things like dysentery. Well, you see the kind of snow we get. These are three box hives. So when we get snow, we get snow. And we have periods of no cleansing flights for months. Sometimes 2 years ago, our last cleansing flight was in October, and our next one was in April. And the bees really suffer that in those years. And so this is the result, where the colony is just going to defecate all over the inside and the outside of the hive. But it's not always. And some people, you would think it would be something like nosema or well, no, it's not really. Anything that makes the colony more active in the wintertime. It could be tracheal mites, it could be varroa mites, it could be mice in the hive, it could be nosema disease, it could be improperly stored feed, it could be just the length of period that they haven't had a cleansing flight. And that can kill the colonies. In this case, it would be nosema disease. So this is the guts of a bee I found dead on the snow, and I scraped it onto a slide under my microscope, and this is the result. Now, if this was on a hemocytometer and in the grid I saw one varroa, one nosema spore, would indicate some 10,000 or tens of thousands of spores per bee. Well, this must be tens of millions of spores per bee. So this colony died, of course. We used to have a problem with tracheal mites, Acarapus. And this is what it would look like, where the colony, all the other colonies in the apiary in February are calm and quiet, but this colony here is just exiting bees, and in the springtime the colony is dead, and there's a huge pile of bees on the ground outside. So this is what tracheal mites look like to us. We don't see this much anymore. You know, through breeding and time, I think the bees have become quite resistant to tracheal mites. Similar to what Brother Adam, through breeding and selecting from strong colonies in the spring, we soon overcame the tracheal mite problem. And then, of course, we all have problems with this, right? Everybody knows what this one is, and this is the big issue now. Trying to keep your bees alive through a season of varroa mite predation. And this year was a real difficult year for us. We went from 0 mite counts in April to 10s and 20s and 30s and 50s in July and probably lost 25% of the colonies that we maintain. So thank God we have an abundance of healthy nukes. We got over 250 nucleus colonies that are just, I'm just waiting to put them in 10 frame boxes. And so, and then there's always this, isn't there? I always kind of laugh when I'm over in the UK and people ask me, well, what happened there? And I said, well, it sure wasn't badgers. And it's actually black bears. So in a 2-week period, the battery died and a sow bear with some cubs destroyed every colony in the apiary. So this is all what happens here. Now, does it really matter why your bees died? Well, other than something like American foul brood, no. But what does matter? It's how you replace your dead honeybee colonies. And so how do you replace your dead honeybee colonies? Well, you can catch swarms. Are there any swarms? You know, if I lost 250 colonies this summer, this autumn, am I going to catch 250 swarms out there? I'll be lucky to catch one swarm out there. Or split your colonies. Well, what happens when you split your colonies? We have a very short season here. And if we depopulate the colony because to make a split, we've just lost honey production. And we tried to maximize our honey production. So by splitting a colony, yes, you get a new colony to replace the dead colony, but you lose honey production in the meantime. Or you can buy nucleus colonies. Nucleus colonies now are well over $200. I don't know what they are over there in the UK. It must be 200 pounds, 300 pounds. I don't know, a lot. And so it becomes unaffordable once you have any number of colonies at all. Well, you could buy packaged bees. Well, where do you get your packaged bees from? Let's say you get them from Italy and maybe Cyprus and maybe in the warmer climates of the Mediterranean. Well, what are you bringing in with those bees? And if you're in the US, you're bringing bees up from down south. And what are you bringing into your neighborhood? You're bringing in small hive beetles. And the folks in the UK, if you keep bringing in bees from overseas, you're going to get small hive beetles. And you're bringing in varroa mites, and you could be bringing in disease. And the bees from, at least in this country, and I guess from Mediterranean countries, is that really the bee that you want in the UK or in northern climates? Nothing about that I want. And so many of them fail. And the beekeeper has to buy more packages. So I don't think it's the best way to go. But suppose you had something like this in your apiary. Suppose that in the summer before now, in the spring, you were able to set up some nucleus colonies like these with a very minimal amount of resources, brood honey, bees, and they built up into something that was like this in the springtime after snow melt, before the flows happen, just at the beginning of brood expansion. Think of it. They're already in your apiary. So this is the idea. Now, this bit of wintering nucleus colonies, this is nothing new. But what happened in the United States here is that in the late 1800s, A.I. Root challenged the beekeepers to send him live bees. And in a very short amount of time, the packaged bee industry took over. And it was much, much easier to ship packages of bees than it was nucleus colonies. Plus, there was no combs to transfer diseases like American foul brood, European foul brood, chalk brood, and things like that. So it was actually a very good way to sell bees in the country. But people forgot about nucleus colonies. When I started in the 70s, nobody bought nucleus colonies. Nucleus colonies were a whisper in the background. And it was always said, don't buy nucleus colonies, they're disease ridden. Well, that's not necessarily true. So I made a list of I bought a lot of books. I bought so many old beekeeping books just to find out who raised nucleus colonies and wintered them over. And look at the list, starting with Kirk Webster, who showed me in the 90s, to Vernon Vickery from Montreal, who claimed that the wintering nucleus colonies was the solution to the closed Canadian border to US packages. You know, the Canadians used to kill all their bees in the autumn and then restock with American packages. Well, they closed the border because of the tracheal mite. And so that was his solution to that problem. Even on the prairies of Manitoba, where with severe winters, he's wintering nucleus colonies. Then, of course, Brother Adam, Manley, your own Manley, wintered nucleus colonies. Snellgrove, another one of your beekeepers, the Snellgrove board, etc., wintering nucleus colonies. Our own C.C. Miller. C.C. Miller, I read something in C.C. Miller's book that just totally blew my mind. He talks about wintering 2 nucleus colonies in one box with a divider, and they form one cluster as if the divider was shoved down between the cluster. Oh my gosh, this is something we discovered once we started wintering nucleus colonies, but here it was, him writing this in 1911. So then Leslie Bill talks about, she went to Africa with Brother Adam looking for the Monticola bee. And she writes in her book about Brother Columban, who was Brother Adam's mentor, and how he devised a hive where he could winter nucleus colonies. And in the springtime, he could use the excess brood to boost production colonies to increase production. My goodness, this is what we all do now. And so that it just shows you that there is nothing new. It's just we forgot. So I'm going to go through these. You can go on the National Honey Show site and look at my old 2013 video, and you can read all this. So there's no reason for me to read this to you. But these are all just the various authors that I picked quotes. So this is the nucleus colonies in my apiary. So in the late 90s, Kirk Webster, a Vermont beekeeper who was wintering nucleus colonies, something he probably gleaned from Brother Adam and from C.C. Miller, invited me to his apiary to see what he was doing. And at the time, I was really struggling with tracheal mite infestation and varroa mite infestation. You know, I had a contract for the apple orchard to provide 600 colonies to them every spring. And these winters with the high losses from parasites, I didn't have 600 colonies that were in adequate condition to pollinate their orchard. And so I'd have to buy in colonies. And so I'm buying in colonies and I'm losing money. And and Kirk Webster takes me down to his apiary to show me his nucleus colonies that are wintering on top of production hives. And out of each of those little nucleus colonies, on the little entrance, was a beard of bees in April, 3 weeks before apple pollination. Well, don't you think that opened my eyes? I said, here's a guy, he's not buying bees. He's got all the bees he needs. He can use them wherever he wants to in his apiary or pollinate apples with them. Wow, what a game changer. So how do you start doing something like this? Well, at first year, I took brood and bees from strong colonies. And that's no different than splitting the colony and losing honey production because you've just depopulated your honey producer. Not too long after that, one year I decided, well, what about all the colonies that are not productive? And I struggle all summer long. I requeen them. I try to build them up to try to get them to make a honey crop. And yeah, they might make a super or two of honey, but there's colonies out that are making 150, 200 to 240 pounds of honey. So what about those? Why can't I sacrifice those colonies? And so that's what I did. Here we are on a nice honey flow. So the bottom 3 boxes are brood nest. And for instance, this one on the right, starting at the yellow box, and that's all honey. That's all capped honey from the yellow box all the way up to the deep on top. You know, there's over 200 pounds of honey there. Well, what do we do with that one on the bottom left? That's one of those colonies it's alive. It doesn't have brood disease. Queen seems okay, but it's just not productive. So what do we do? Well, that's doing the spinning wheels and taking up space in my apiary. Why can't we sacrifice that colony? Get rid of it, but use the resources within that colony to make nucleus colonies. Get rid of the queen. You don't want that queen, but just use the bees and the brood and the honey and the pollen to make nucleus colonies. So here's a colony that's a non-productive colony. It's 2 broods and a super. And I can make about 4 colonies. Yeah, on the average of these non-productive colonies, you can make about 4 nucleus colonies. And I can overwinter those nucleus colonies. And I'm telling you that I will have a better winter percentage with those nucleus colonies. So there's 4 of them. And as compared to this 1 nucleus colony. Even if a nucleus colony dies, I still got 3, whereas before I would have had 1. So what do we use for equipment? So we use all different kinds of equipment as far as nuke boxes goes. We can use single standalone nuke boxes with multiple stories. We can use division board feeders that separate one nucleus colony from another, or we can use solid dividers that separate one nucleus colony from another, each having its own entrance. This one would be over here, this one other would be on the back side. We can use multiple story nucleus colonies where there's 2 in the bottom with a divider, and then each one gets a super of 4 combs on top. So there are actually 2 individual colonies. This is my favorite. Or we can use styrofoam beehives. You know, that some places they really prefer these polystyrene beehives. I think they're silly. We don't need it here though. They do just fine in wood. And I like to joke that it's like keeping your bees in a beer cooler. But some people really like that method. So how do we make these nucleus colonies? How do we set them up originally? Okay, so we've decided on a colony that needs to be, that's non-productive. It's only got a super of honey when everything else has 3 or 4. We take the colony apart and begin stocking the nuke boxes with honey and brood and bees. So we start at the side wall of a production colony that's not productive, and we pull out the first comb, and it's a frame of honey. Well, that goes against the divider in one of the empty nuke boxes, and we pull out the second comb, and that's another frame of honey. So that goes on the other side of the divider, and whatever bees are covering it. Then we pull out a frame of brood and another frame of brood, and so. And then in the bottom box, there's usually some empty combs. And so with adhering bees, each nucleus colony minus a queen gets a frame of honey and a frame and a half to 2 frames of brood. We try to include 1 frame of sealed or emerging brood and the other frame with a good mix of brood in all stages, larvae, because the larvae hold the bees in the box so they don't drift to other nucleus colonies when you take them to their summer yard. And then the outside comb would be an empty comb. And you can see that that it's not plugged with bees. You know, on the right-hand photo, you can see where the bees are, and they're not overflowing. For instance, the top box in the right-hand photo, look how they're overflowing. That's way too many bees. You don't need that many bees in there. You just need something like this to cover the brood, to keep the brood warm, because as soon as that frame and a half or 2 frames of brood emerge, the cavity is full of bees. So that's what we do. We go through all the non-productive hives, then we split them all up, or sometimes we'll have we'll have nucleus colonies left over in the spring that really weren't strong enough to sell or to put in 10 frame equipment. So we'll just add more stories of nuke box supers to them and let them build up. And then at about mid-June, we'll split them all up into nucleus colonies. We get a lot of our nucleus colonies from there, early nucleus colonies. And then we move those newly set up nucleus colonies to a new apiary, at least more than 2 miles away. And you could give them a cell. I prefer to give them laying queens, caged laying queens, because when I give a nucleus colony that was just made up, a queenless nucleus colony, a laying queen, I get almost entire acceptance. So for instance, this summer we made 335 nucleus colonies and 3 queens got rejected. And last year it was 350 and 5 queens got rejected. Now what happens if you use a queen cell? Well, in my mating nukes, in my mating apiaries, you know, I get 70 to 75% acceptance. Maybe even if you got 80 or 85% acceptance, now you're talking about 15 or 20% rejection. And you've just taken the most important, most valuable resource in your apiary, the brood, and you put it in a box and they rejected the queen. That's not good enough for me. I need a better average than that. So we use mated queens. And this is what you wind up with the following spring. These nucleus colonies, this colony is still, the hive is still wrapped with felt paper for the winter. So the snow is just melted. Look at the population of this thing already. This is going to go on and make 80 or 100 pounds of honey for me this year. So, you know. So at this point in time, the production colonies are supporting the nucleus colonies, correct? So you're splitting up, you're dividing up, you're sacrificing your non-productive colonies. So you have colonies from your honey production operation, supporting the creation of nucleus colonies. At what cost? Well, obviously sacrifice production, but also sacrifice production colonies. Now, if you weren't making nucleus colonies and you had a non-productive colony, what would you do? You'd requeen it, you'd try to help it out, and maybe next year it'd be a better colony. But splitting up, sacrificing production colonies is a good place to start. You have to start somewhere. Okay, so managing your nucleus colonies. Swarming and absconding is the big deal. If they get too crowded and they don't have enough combs to expand onto, they're going to swarm. If they get too crowded and they get too hot in the summertime, so you get into the dog days of summer, you get into the hot weather where they can't cool that little cavity off, they'll abscond because of the heat. They'll fly away, they'll leave a handful of bees in the hive and all the brood and no queen cells. Whereas swarming, they'll swarm, they'll leave 30% of the bees or whatever and queen cells, and they can raise a new queen. Well, the colonies that have abscond, when you go there and you find out that what's happened, they don't have swarm cells, they have emergency cells, you see. They still have a population, which was whatever bees were emerging at the time have begun to repopulate, plus all the bees that are out in the fields foraging are back to the hive, but that's what happens. So you have to prevent that. So with a movable divided feeder, you could expand the colony onto 8 combs instead of 4 by moving the feeder over to the sidewall and using additional boxes. You can place supers above excluders, so the excluder contacts the divider between the 2 nucleus colonies and the queens can't cross over or under the excluder. You can put supers on top. The nucleus colonies, both of them, they'll go up there and work side by side in the supers, and they don't fight, and they don't go kill the other queen. And then, of course, you can use a triangle bee escape or some kind of an escape board. When you want to take the honey off, you put it right on the queen excluder, and the bees go down into whichever nuke they want to. It seems like they populate evenly, and you can take the supers off. But the problem with this is that now the brood nest is 100% brood with 0 honey for winter. So I kind of abandoned doing that. You can make additional nukes. You can pull brood and bees out of the nucleus colonies that are getting too strong and make additional nucleus colonies. So a lot of times back in the early, when I was doing this, I showed you that I made 4 nucleus colonies out of one non-productive hive, and each one of those gave me another one, or 3/4 of a nuke, and I made another 50% of the nucleus colonies. So I wound up making 6 nucleus colonies per non-productive hive. But then I had to feed too much, and they just didn't build up as well. Also, you can take brood out of nucleus colonies to boost your production colonies, as Brother Columban did, correct? Well, yes, Brother Columban at Buckfast Abbey. Well, yes, you can do that. And I call those brood factories. And I harvest emerging brood and bees, and I give them to colonies that are struggling a little bit. And that boosts those colonies that are struggling a little bit, and it reduces the population of the nucleus colonies and makes them less inclined to swarm. But then again, you're depopulating your nucleus colonies. So I managed nucleus colonies in single-story nuke boxes, double nuke boxes for years, something like this. Each one of those has 2 nucleus colonies, but that means moving the bees. So you set them up, you move them to an apiary for the summer. Then when you're done in the autumn and you're ready to move them to their winter locations, because they're in singles, you can't just put them on a hive stand someplace, because they'll be buried under snow and they'll never get a cleansing flight until later in spring. So we winter them on top of production hives like this. So there's the production hive with 2 or 3 boxes, and then an inner cover, crown board, and then the double nucleus colonies. Well, that means moving them. And then in the springtime, when I want to check the colonies and I want to check the production colonies, I get to take them off, check the production colonies, put them back on top, rewrap them, or I want to work with them. I have to move them to another apiary. So I'm moving them 3 or 4 times. Well, I'll tell you what, I hate moving bees. Moving bees is the worst job for me that there ever was. I used to move 600 colonies into the apple orchards by hand. And I swore I would never move another beehive if I ever could help it. And so I do my best not to move bees. So there's a better way than managing singles. Think like a bee. Do bees think down, or do bees think up? Bees think up. They move up. So why not, rather than having them move sideways by expanding the brood nest with more combs or like that, you just put another story on top. So you have a nice colony like this one, and you put a box of combs on top, and they move up into it, or a box of foundation on top, and they move up into it, and they expand their brood nest, and now the cavity is larger, so the hot weather doesn't affect absconding so much, and it gives them expansion route upward, and they don't swarm as readily. It takes less equipment. Before, when we were moving one of the nukes into a brand new nuke box, you need another nuke box, another division board feeder, another bottom board, another crown board, another outer cover. Well, that's twice as amount of equipment. Well, having them like this and expanding them upwards, all I needed was an extra nuke super, a little 4-frame super. So what we do now is, after we set them up and we give them that caged queen with the cork out of the candy end, I come back about 10 days later to check to see if the queen is laying. 8 days is pretty good, and she'll just be laying at 8 days. 6 days is pushing it. You might find a couple of eggs. 7 days, it's maybe more eggs, and what's a little more difficult. Geez, by 10 days, now you're seeing a brood pattern, you're seeing larvae, you're seeing jelly. It's real easy to tell if she's laying. And if she's not laying and she wasn't accepted, what do you find? You find emergency cells in the brood pattern. Well, at that point, on 10 days, you can remove those emergency cells and give that nucleus colony another queen. Lucky me, I raise queens. So I have all the queens I need. And they'll almost always accept her the second time. Almost always. If I wait too long, if I wait 12 or 13 days, it's likely that those emergency cells will begin to emerge. And those virgins will come out. And now, rather than just cutting off emergency cells, easy peasy, now you got to look for the virgin running around in the colony, or two or three. And that makes it way more difficult. And it's also more difficult to get a new queen accepted in a colony that already has a virgin hatched out. So that's why I do 8 to 10 days. So at that point, I want to add my second story. So I've gone through these 4 combs in the bottom box. Okay, she's laying. All right. Now remember, the inside comb was a honeycomb. Well, a nectar with some sealed honey. 10 days after installation here, they've removed that nectar, that open nectar, and replaced it with eggs and larvae. Now I want to add a second story to this box. So first year I said, well, I'll just put a box of foundation on top. And what happened? Many of them swarmed, because bees don't see overhead foundation as expansion room when they need expansion room now. Right this minute, they need expansion room. And you put 4 frames of, or whatever it is, 5 frames, or whatever your box size is, on top of that cluster, and they swarm anyway. So what we do is we pull that comb of brood that's against the divider, and we put a foundation there. And then we put a box, this box on this end, we put that on with 3 foundations, and we put that box, that comb frame of brood that we've removed, and we put it up there, and we put that box back on. Now what have we accomplished? This foundation against the divider is now adjacent to brood. The bees don't like that. This comb, these 3 foundations up in the top, the first one is now adjacent to brood and above brood. Bees don't like that. It's a violation of bee space. And what do? They jump right on the foundation, they start to draw it out, and now the queen has a place to expand into. She expands into that so fast. I've seen foundation drawn out with little 1/8-inch cells finished, and there's eggs in them already. So they just jump right on that foundation. And about 2 to 3 weeks after you give them that foundation, this is what it looks like from underneath. Thank you. So this is the comb that we moved up from down. The one on the left, you can just see it. It's kind of dark. We've moved that up from down below. Remember, that's the one we put in the top box against the divider. And these next 3 were foundation. And look how fast they've drawn that foundation. It's 2 to 3 weeks. That's all. Look at the brood in it already. And you look at it and go, oh, oops, uh-oh. What is that? Well, that's a queen cup. And so you have to open up that queen cup and look. And sure enough, there's probably an egg in it, because they're getting crowded. And the flow is on, and they think it's time to swarm. And so what do you do now? What I do now is I make sure there's none of these queen cells started, no cups, no eggs, no jelly in any of those. Get rid of every single one of them, and you remove the top box, put a box of combs right in the middle, or a box or 2 combs on the inside and 2 foundations on the outside of that box, and you put this box right back on top. Now what have you created? You've just made the bees think that they are way weaker than they are. They have all this empty comb space right in the middle, and wax to draw and use that foundation and make comb out of it, and they're just happy as pigs, and they just draw that right out and they fill it right up. And some years, and some of these nucleus colonies, especially the earlier made ones, you might even have to do that again. And so we always try to add the foundation not as a box, but as a mix. And so you can put 2 foundations against the divider and 2 combs on the outside, and the next box up might be 2 combs on the inside and 2 foundations on the outside, sort of in a zigzag pattern. So you always have foundation next to brood and above brood. and the bees will draw it out much better than all alone by itself. So what can we do with these nucleus colonies? Well, obviously you can replace your winter loss. And so this year I'm going to have, between spring and next spring, this spring and next spring, I'm probably going to lose 30 to 40% of my bees. But I have 250 awesome nucleus colonies. So boom, I'm going to put them right back in there, restock everything and get going again. Making increase. So I want more beehives. So I can use them for making increase. What about the weak colonies in the spring? And they come through and they're kind of, they're not just doing great. They're not dying. They're not diseased. They just need help. Well, you get rid of the old queen and you unite one of these lovely nucleus colonies with them and you've got your production hive back. Or you can produce income. You need some money. Last year was this, it's been a tough couple of years. And honey sales, the price went down because of so much rubbish being imported. And so I was really struggling to pay my bills. I sold 100 nucleus colonies, got $20,000. There you go, got my bills paid. Now, brood factories, you can make brood factories, as I said, to boost non-productive colonies. I use a lot of the brood out of my brood factories, which are nucleus colonies that are just they're dedicated. The default is they produce me brood, frames of emerging brood. Well, I use those frames of emerging brood to set up wicked strong cell builders and raise my queens. And then when I'm ready to make nucleus colonies, I use the remaining brood in brood factories. The queen is laying all the time, so she's producing more brood all the time. I produce nucleus colonies. So now once you have a supply of nucleus colonies, now you can use the nucleus colonies as brood factories to boost cell building colonies, to make more nucleus colonies. Now, what's happening? Now the nucleus colonies are supporting the production colonies, where before the production colonies were supporting the nucleus colonies. Now you've got it. Now you've got a supply of nucleus colonies to be used where you want in your apiary to support your apiary from within your apiary. And that's when you've reached some level of sustainability. So anyway, what supports the nucleus colonies? Well, you've got them supporting the production. Something has to support them. It's the brood factories. The brood factories are giving you brood, frames of brood, to make nucleus colonies. So you see what happens here. So you've got production colonies at the top of the triangle, and mating nuclei at the bottom right, and nucleus colonies at the bottom left. So production colonies, if you have no nucleus colonies, production colonies can supply the nucleus colonies. The nucleus colonies can reestablish the production colonies. The production colonies over time and selection give you breeding stock to supply the mating nuclei with queen cells of good breeding stock. Those cell builders are boosted by brood from nucleus colonies. The mating nucleus colonies give you mated queens that go in the nucleus colonies, and the nucleus colonies support the production colonies. Do you see that? So it's around and around and around, and each one of these of the triad supports the other. So nucleus colonies support the production colonies. Production colonies give breeding stock to the mating nuclei, and the mating nuclei give queens to the nucleus colonies, you see, and around and around. So here we are. These are brood factories. In the spring, about dandelion bloom, which is, first half of May. And we build them up into 3 stories at least, because they're getting so strong and they're going to swarm. And so we're pulling brood out all the time. So this is what they're getting to look like. And we're pulling combs of brood out of them. One, if they can, you want to pull enough brood so they don't swarm, but not so much they dwindle. And I'm back there, I'm saying I'm back there about every 2 weeks. I have 100 of them, and I go in rotation. And I start with number one and I pull what it can give me. And the next number two, is I pull what it'll give me. And around, when I'm done for the day, I come back in a couple of days when I need more, and I continue on until the very last one. And I start over at the beginning. And it might be 2 weeks, it might be 10 days, depending on the season. And we separate them and we pull the frames of brood that we need, and nice frames of emerging brood and nice young bees. That's what I'm looking for, is emerging brood, because emerging brood in a very short time will be nurse bees. And we make whole apiaries of nucleus colonies. And then we build them up for the summer and we overwinter them. So all of these nucleus colonies came from brood factories. Well, where do the queens come from? You know, we need to raise quality queens. We can't just take any rubbish bug that's going to lay an egg and that's, oh, there's a queen. Yay, what got? No, we're going for quality, not quantity. And so we need to raise the quality queens. And where do they come from? Where do queens like this come from? This thing, she's just awesome. She's an awesome queen. Where do they come from? Well, it's all about the royal jelly. How much royal jelly was fed to that larva until it spun its cocoon and stopped feeding? The maximum amount of jelly you can give them is going to increase the quality. And where does that jelly come from? It comes from nurse bees. And how do you ensure that you have enough nurse bees in your cell builder? Okay, I'm going to pass that one. So by taking brood out of cell build, out of brood factories, and boosting these cell builders into enormous colonies, I have more than enough nurse bees in these cell builders. And so this is a cell builder after I've stocked it with brood, emerging brood from the brood factories. So the bottom 3 boxes are the brood chamber, and the next 2 boxes are honey supers. And the top box is the box of brood and bees that I harvested from the brood factories. The queen is below the queen excluder. Following Brother Adams' description of how he raised his cells, I'm boosting this colony's population with emerging brood. 7 frames I have up here boosting the population. There are no queen. There's no queen above this. And this is a honey super because I use that honey super when I set up the cell builder. But I leave it like this for 10 days. And in 10 days, this colony is so full of nurse bees, ready to receive a graft. And this is the kind of a thing you find after you separate that colony and you add the most of the nurse bees out of the queen's brood nest into the queenless cell builder. And you wind up with something like this. And this is because I've boosted this colony to the swarming pitch. They're so strong there. If I left them alone, if I walked away from them, they would swarm. Absolutely. Well, that's what I want, because I want them with all the resources that they can have so that they make the best cells they can. And I put my graft into that. I graft. There's the graft. You can see how small those larvae are. See that in comparison to maybe something on my finger. You know, they're just tiny, tiny, tiny. And this is the result. This is the result. These are the kind of cells you get. Enormous cells packed with jelly, even after they're sealed, even after they're on day 10 after graft, when they're ripe and you're ready to put them in the mating nuclei. They still have jelly in them, which to me means that they had so much jelly that they never ran out. They had an abundance of jelly. Well, that's what I want. I want them not to run out of jelly. And this is what you get. See, you get a cell on day 10 after graft, still got jelly in it. So there was ample jelly, more than she needed. And you get these enormous pupae. This is on day 10. This is going to hatch out in a day and a half, 2 days. Look at the size of her. Just getting her queen, her wings. You see the little wing buds? Awesome looking. And then because of what I'm doing, I harvest the cells. On that same day, I can reestablish that cell builder and harvest more emerging brood from the brood factories and get another round of queen cells. I can get another round of queen cells out of all these huge cell building, huge populated cell builders. I can get another round of queen cells every 20 days. And lately, in the last couple of years, we've actually removed that deep super that's above the queen excluder after we remove the cells. You got a box of nectar and pollen and young bees and a scattering of brood that hasn't emerged yet. Put that on a bottom board, take it to the mating yard, give it a queen cell, and you have a new colony. And so we harvested about, I don't know, 25 new colonies. We do about something like 56 cell builders in the summer. Well, first 25 we harvested, and wow, did they look beautiful? Did they winter well? Just so you're not wasting bees. You're not just using bees to make queen cells. I'm getting more colonies out of these things. And at the end of the season, when the cell building is all done and you can harvest the honey supers, this is the kind of crop we're getting. I think I forget what it was. It was something like 4,000 pounds. enough queen cells for 1,200 queens and 4,000 pounds of honey. Rather sustainable, I would say. Now you have to winter them. And so we get really deep snows here. And so it doesn't really seem to matter. It doesn't really bother the bees, but you have to make sure they have enough feed for winter. So we heft the boxes, we make sure they have enough, and we can feed them with the division board feeders, but they don't really hold enough. And we have to go back and back and feed them with cans. Mostly we feed them this way with the cans on the crown board, on the little crown board above the feed hole. And actually, in later years, we've been putting on 2 at once, and they meet over the crown board feed hole. And the bees go right up and drain both gallons in a week or less. And if they need a third, we give them a third, and it's done. And we're done feeding for the year. We try not to overfeed. You could feed these any colony. You can overfeed. If you look at this picture, you can see where the cluster is. The circle that's drawn is the core of the brood nest. Above it and around it, you can see honey, and the dark ones, the dark bits are pollen that's stored under honey, and then between the seams are bees. And so you can see where the dotted line would be the active cluster. Well, right in the middle of the winter cluster, right in the middle of that cluster, you look and there's empty cells. There's cells with bees. Well, the colder it is out, they need to raise the temperature of the brood nest to maintain that temperature of 95 degrees or whatever it is. And so they fill more cells with bees, and that raises the temperature. And when they want to cool it off a little bit, they vacate more cells. Well, if you had every cell filled with food, there's no way they can do that. So it's important that you don't fill every cell in the hive with feed. So then we're done feeding and we're getting ready for winter. And so on the left is a double nuke box with a divider that goes right down through the 4, and two nuke supers on top, and everything is heavy for winter. The top box is full. The bottom box is probably 3/4 full, with a little bit of space near the entrance, and that's their cluster space. And then they move up through the winter. And we have an upper entrance to release some of the moisture. I know some people don't believe in that, but believe me, in this climate, we need it, because they'll be soaking wet if you don't have that. It's only a 3/4 inch hole. And then on top of the crown board or inner covers is a piece of foam that prevents the crown board, the inner covers, from getting cold and condensing hive moisture and then having it drip on the bees. The moisture leaves the upper entrance as vapor and doesn't condense inside the hive. And then we put a 15-pound felt or tar paper or whatever you may call it around the hive, and we staple it on the hive, tie the cover down, leave the upper entrance open, and this is an apiary. This is actually my cell building apiary. So these front rows here are the brood factories, and the taller colonies in the back are the cell builders. So this is sort of what it looks like when we get a yard all wrapped up. I always like to talk about this. So, you know, I always ask people at presentations, do you like your day job? Because everybody always grumbles about their day job. And also think about this. In 2011, from 50 overwintered nucleus colonies, between May 9th and June 19th, so that's the time I'm setting up cell builders and raising queens to make my nucleus colonies. I used 245 frames of brood to stock 35 cell builders. Okay, then when I was done with the cell builders, I switched over to making nucleus colonies. Between June 16th and July 20th, I used brood that I harvested from the brood factories to make 330 nucleus colonies to overwinter. So all those resources came out of 50 overwintered nucleus colonies, I will say, in a perfect year. So you can't get those huge results every year, but adequate. So we make all yards like this full of nucleus colonies. And then let's see, where's that one? Okay, so you think about it. If you had 50 nucleus colonies and you raised enough queens to make these 330 nucleus colonies, and you had a 20% loss, so that's 30 to 60. So say you had lost 60, so you still got 270, and you take 50 out for this year, so you got 220. And over here, we're selling it for $200 a piece. So now you're talking about $40,000. $40,000 for playing with your bees. $40,000 for making nucleus colonies and selling them. You love your day job. So how do you go from here? Yeah, I understand. You don't have that much equipment. You don't have the expertise. You're a little bit nervous to get started. Well, why don't you start a club project with your local association? You know, okay, you're not sure about how to raise queens. Well, why not support your local queen producer? Raise your queens, support your local queen producer. Well, you say there's no queens available when you want them. Well, there's no queens available locally in the north in the spring when we would normally be making divisions. Well, why don't you just wait until midsummer? Maybe we start June 15th making nucleus colonies. If you started then, and there was a demand for that supplier's queens, that they would make more queens for you. And that's the idea: is you make your nucleus colonies at a time when your local queen producers are at the peak of their season and everything is right, and it's they can get their queens mated, and they can make you queens, and you can use them in your nucleus colonies. And then once you learn how to do nucleus colonies, then your club project can be raising queen cells. So anyway, thank you for listening.
That was great. That's great. So do you want to stop sharing? I can stop your sharing your screen. Okay, we've got lots of questions. Okay. Yep. I'm trying to work out which ones to start with. So, I mean, you may have answered some of them because they started quite early on. So Colin has said, when do you judge the best time to add your honey boxes?
My first honey boxes have to go on in time for the dandelion flow. The dandelion flow is our first real honey flow of the year. And when we're coming out of winter, our brood nest is 2 deeps and a medium super. And if we leave them like that, and they're located in the top of the brood nest, the cluster of bees, and the brood rearing cluster is located in the top. And the nectar starts to come in from dandelion, and it can fill supers. And if you don't have supers on them, what does it do? It goes in the top of the brood nest where brood is emerging. So as soon as the brood emerges, they're filling it up with nectar. And now the queen can't lay there. And that creates a conflict between nectar storers and brood rearers. And who's going to win every time? The nectar storers. And so that drives the queen down lower and lower in the hive. And I believe that downward pressure of incoming nectar on an unsupered brood nest is the main trigger for swarming. And so we have to get our supers on. We put on 2 supers of comb before dandelion, so all those early flows will go in the brood nest. I mean, in the honey supers, and not in the brood nest.
Okay. And so do you use? I think I could see you did. They say, do you use queen excluders in your stacks?
I don't use queen excluders in honey production colonies.
And why not?
Because I think that selects for the least prolific queens to stay in the hive, and the most prolific queens are going to swarm, unless you do all kinds of crazy swarm management. And I've got too many colonies to do that intense swarm management. So rather, we put on supers early so that the early flows will go in the supers. And then we reverse the brood chambers. Remember, I got 3 boxes in my brood chambers. The bottom one is usually empty. So this is the pattern. We put on 2 honey supers early in the season, and the bees can move right up. She might even go into the bottom super and start to lay. I don't really care. I want an unlimited brood nest. I don't want to restrict my prolific queens to the bottom below a queen excluder. Mm-hmm. And then we reverse. So when we reverse the boxes, once again, we take that bottom box, it's got a lot of empty cells in it, and we put that on the top of the brood nest, whereas the top goes on the bottom. Now there's another bunch of empty cells that the queen can move up into and not feel that downward pressure. So that's what we're trying to do until the honey flow starts, and we can just add more supers. The main honey flow, once you get the bees storing honey, they seem to give up swarming as long as you stay ahead of them in the number of supers you have. So once they get moving up and you've corrected that downward pressure, I don't really see a problem with swarming anymore.
Okay. How old are your queens then? What's your old, how long do you allow them to stay, to be alive?
I leave them, let them stay, 1, as long as they are productive. Okay. And 2, as long as the queens haven't, the colony hasn't superseded them. Okay. So I like to have my colonies supersede the queens. This shows me a colony is intelligent. They know what they're doing. They can replace a queen before the colony fails. I don't want the colony to start to fail and then have the bees replace them, the queens. I want the queens replaced when the bees think so right off the bat. So I got so many colonies that will replace their queen every year or 2, and you'll never even notice it. Mm-hmm. But if the colony is not replacing the queen, and we get into mid-season, after we're done making nucleus colonies, it's time for requeening. Mm-hmm. And we go through the operation, and anything that's not productive, anything that's got a poor brood pattern, or maybe chalk brood or anything like that, any of those disease like chalk brood, we'll requeen those colonies. Of course, if it's foul or something, we get rid of it. But, okay. So no, I don't requeen by the calendar. I requeen by performance.
Okay, so this is quite a long question. I did think it's from Paul, who I did say maybe he should unmute himself. He's asking about how you reduce varroa buildup in the spring. Paul, do you want to ask the question, or shall I ask it?
Can you ask it? Okay. I think you've got it written down, please.
Yes, I have. It's whether or not. Okay, so what he's asking is when you do the first spring inspection, you are certain that the queen is laying well and the colony is building. So he is looking, is it an option? Would you recommend if you insert next to and either side of the brood a frame of drone foundation so that the drone eggs are laid at the earliest opportunity in the colony to build up cycle in those two frames. So obviously the objective is to entice the varroa into the drone brood, which is then capped and removed. And then at the early stage then, and basically replacing the frames, and then you remove that drone brood and hopefully the varroa with it, and replace the frames with normal brood or drawn foundation. And obviously at this early stage, the colony doesn't need the drones, is what Paul is saying. So it encourages the queen to lay unfertilized drone eggs at that time in order to help reduce the varroa buildup. But he was saying his concern is if he does that, will the process slow down the colony spring buildup? I mean, or will the benefits be a bonus in the long run? What do you think? Did that all make sense?
I think the benefits can be in the long run. Suppose it's drone mother colonies, and you're trying to propagate drones from those to mate with your virgins. Yeah, it could be. As far as harvesting drones to reduce the overall population of varroa mice, yeah, of course. I know people that do that, and so that's a viable IPM approach to varroa management. I think it only can go so far.
Yeah.
I think eventually and then there's other drone brood in the hives, right? It's not like you have every comb worker brood.
Do it early. If you did it early enough.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's going to help. Everything is going to help.
Yeah. Okay. So you would possibly, if that's an option, you might recommend it?
Yeah, I might recommend it. I mean, I have too many colonies to do that. I couldn't possibly do that. But if you had a few enough colonies, surely you could do that.
Okay. This is a completely separate question. So this is about microscopes, and what type and size microscope do you use, and might you recommend?
I think it depends on what you want it for. If you were looking for, say, tracheal mites in the thorax, you don't need a very powerful. You could use a binocular. I think they're talking 40 power.
Mm-hmm. They don't say what size.
Yeah, I think so. Looking for.
Is that what you use?
If you need a stronger microscope, you need to get something that's got a number of lenses on it, and I bought a beautiful one that's got, I don't know, probably goes 10 and 40 and 400 and an oil immersion. I got it from a company that sells used microscopes that came out of a hospital oncology department. So, really it's going to depend on what you want it for.
And also how much you can afford, probably.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you get them used like that, it wasn't bad.
Okay. So Nelda has asked, how long do you leave your newly created nukes queenless? Did you?
I make them up. So if we make up 50 nucleus colonies, and it might take most of the day, and we're done mid-afternoon. We'll take them to their summer yard and give them queens. And we don't wait. I don't like to wait. The longer you wait, the worse the acceptance is going to be, because the colony starts queen cells rapidly. Tomorrow there will be queen cells started. They may be so small that they only look like a worker cell that's overly provisioned with royal jelly.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But and once they've started them, if they get far enough into the construction of the emergency cells, they will not accept your queen. Mm-hmm. So I just, they know they're queenless in a couple of hours. In an hour or two, they know they're queenless. And the quicker you can get that queen in there in her shipping cage, and the better.
Okay. So Maria says, when you put a super above a twin nuke in one brood box, why don't the workers kill the other queen?
I haven't a clue. To tell you the truth. Okay. You would think they would. But I guess because they're separated and they can't fight with each other. If you look at what Brother Adam used to do, I mean, he would take a queen out of a hive and give it and run a new queen in that colony that he just harvested from the mating nuke, and she would be accepted. Well, the reason is because she's a laying queen and she's acting like a laying queen and her pheromones are like a laying queen and they have no reason to reject her. But if you take a queen from a shipping cage that's been in a shipping cage for a number of days and she's shrunken and her pheromones are not happening and she's not laying eggs and she's not acting, and you run that into a colony where you just removed the old queen, they'll slaughter her almost every time. So I think that's what has to do with it. It's a laying queen. You're keeping the queens separated,
Mhm.
and they don't ever meet,
Okay.
and so the bees don't fight.
So there's a follow-on question from another person saying, so if you're using the division board feeder, what keeps the queens, because you haven't got from crossing over into the other nuke?
Well, on top of the for my crown board, and when I'm using those feeders, is a grain bag or a seed bag.
Okay.
And you put that on top, and that sits on top of the feeder. And when you put the lid on, it pushes the bag against the openings of the feeder. And if you notice those feeders, there's a division, a vertical division in the middle of the hole there. And so there's actually two chambers in those division board feeders. One, and an entrance to one chamber is for one nuke, and the entrance on the other side is on the other chamber for the other nuke. So they never have any contact.
Okay. Okay. So how do you, another question, how do you move the brood from the brood factories to other apiaries?
Well, one of my brood factories group is in the cell builder, so I just put it in a box as I'm going, and when I have a box of brood and bees and a couple frames of honey on the outside, then I just carry it across the yard. If I'm going from a far away brood factory, I just put an empty box on a bottom, and with a little lid on top, and we go down the rows and we pull out frames of emerging brood and bees and a frame of honey on each outside. And when it's got 7 combs of brood, and when we're full, we put a cover and strap it. And when we have the 4 we need, we carry them over to the cell building yard, which is a few miles away, and like that. So I leave the bees on it, of course. I don't want to transport brood. I don't want to put brood in a box without any bees to help keep it warm.
Okay. I mean, you didn't mention as to how many apiaries are we talking about?
I've got 2 brood factory apiaries and 1 cell building apiary.
Okay. Okay.
And I got a mating apiary, and I got production. I got 40 apiaries.
And what distance are we talking about?
The cell building apiary is about 3 miles from the mating apiary. My farthest away production yard is probably it's in New York State, not Vermont. It's probably an hour and a half away.
Brian, I hear you've got your hand up. Do you want to ask a question? Possibly not. Okay.
No, thanks.
All right. What do you use as mating nukes? Full-size frames or mini-style mating nukes?
I use deep frames, but they're half length.
Okay.
I cut them down and remilled them, and added another end bar to each frame. I have to remill the top and bottom bars to fit. And there's 4 of those in each cavity. So I use a 4-way mating nuke box. So it's got 4 of these 4-frame, half-length mating nuke combs, each with its own entrance. And we have our mating yard is, there are 4 groups, and each group has 4 circles, and each circle has 8 4-way, and we catch 1 circle every 4 days. And so we have 128 mating nukes that we catch every 4 days.
All right.
And it's a 16-day program. And so by the time we have caught all 4 groups, we're back to the beginning again, and it's been 16 days and we catch that group again.
You made the comment, like everything like June the 15th sounds an important day in your calendar. Does everything work? I mean, do you change things?
Never.
Okay.
No, because I'd forget. It's written in my brain, like, and it's written in stone.
Okay.
The first day we set up a cell builder is May 9th every year. And that gives us the first queens to catch on June 13th. And that gives us, then we're making nucleus colonies on June 15th. And we finished making nucleus colonies about July 10th. So in that short period of time, we're raising, 1,200 queens and making 350 nucleus colonies. And we have to be done by July 10th, because otherwise we miss the flow. And if we miss the flow, then the nucleus colonies don't build up well. We don't get the population we need. They surely will never draw any foundation. So we want to get them. We want to get them well before the lime flow. Our lime flow is about the first 3 weeks of July. So we want to get them established and well underway and populated before the end of the lime flow.
So Mike, can I just check? There's
For
quite
Americans, that's basswood, excuse me.
Okay, so there's quite a lot of questions. Are you okay still, me
Oh,
going?
yeah, I'm fine. I took the day off.
Okay, so I think this is a question from one of our visitors from Macedonia, I think. So do you have swarming problems, and how are you resolving this?
Yeah, we do have swarming problems, of course. I tried to say how I did it. So I super early before dandelions, so that the bees are moving up and able to store early incoming nectar in the honey supers rather than the brood nest. Then once that flow gets well underway, we reverse the brood chambers, removing any early queen cells that we find, and add more supers as needed. So that will reduce almost all of the swarming. All of the swarming? Never all of the swarming. Of course not. So then we go back and we check, and if we can find them before they swarm, then we'll do something about it. Splitting a colony is a good way to stop swarming, but it's also a good way to reduce your overall honey crop. So rather than, too many beekeepers want to use splitting a colony, dividing a colony in the spring as their primary default swarm control method. And I really am against that. I think it should be the last thing you do to stop swarming, because not every colony is going to swarm, and there are plenty of colonies out there that are going to be packed with bees, and they're just overflowing with bees and honey, and they won't start queen cells. And so I'm looking for those. Those are the ones I'm selecting for possible breeding stock. And if I split every colony every year, I'm never gonna have the bees show me which ones are more prone to swarming, which ones have a higher propensity to swarm than the ones that don't. And I'm looking for those ones that have a low propensity.
Okay. So lots of people have said thank you. Some people have left saying they've really enjoyed it, but there's lots of questions. So secondly, Henry has said, is there a rough tipping point in terms of the number of hives you have before you actively, and this is not for you really, it's actively start a queen rearing program rather than just raising queens when you lose an existing one? I mean, what
yeah, I think if you have any number of colonies at all, I think it's wise to raise at least some of your colonies, queens for some of your colonies.
Yeah.
Fitting it into your management time can be an issue.
Yeah.
I think that you can raise better queens in your own location under your own management from the best colonies you have than you can buying queens in from faraway places with everybody else's. They got their own problems, and those might not be your problems. And also they're not designed, they're not bred for success in your climate. So
I mean, the thing, Cambridgeshire beekeepers, there are, I mean, I don't know about everybody else who's here, but a lot of people would be what you would call backyard beekeepers, I think. So, that's why I suppose when you say, you get your apiary, your association to do this rather than everybody individuals doing it. It might
or as a group,
Yeah.
as a group learning how to raise queen cells. Having a number of queen cells available to the beekeepers that are participating in the project, and there they go. Or, as I said, support your local queen producer. So I know some great queen producers in the UK. You know, there's one guy I won't mention, but he's down in Allerford. Oh my gosh, doesn't he raise some nice queens? And there's others too that raise exceptional queens. That's what you should be going for. You should be buying the Cypriots and the Greeks and the Italians and the whatever. You're going to get small hive beetles, and then you're going to rue the day.
Okay. Do you clip and mark your queens?
I mark my queens. I don't clip my queens. So I am the designated marker. So when we're catching queens, they find the queen on the mating nuke frame, and somebody brings it to me, and I catch her and I mark her and I put her in a cage and I fill the cage with attendants. That's my job. So I get to see and handle every queen I make. And if I don't like that queen, if I don't think she's acceptable, if she's too small, she's got a broken leg, whatever it is, she's done. I would never sell a queen if I wouldn't use her myself. I would never sell a queen to anybody else like that.
Yeah. Okay. This is more to do with, so any opinions, I mean, you didn't mention this, on early spring stimulating feeding or with either syrup or pollen. I mean, do you do that?
Yes, we do. For stimulation, I definitely use a pollen substitute. You know, we go months, we go 4 to 5 months without a cleansing flight even. And so all the early brood rearing is beginning when there's still snow on the ground. The bees can't fly, there's no pollen available. Okay. And so they're relying on the pollen that was stored last autumn from goldenrod and aster and other plants to start brood rearing. And if we have a delayed spring, and it's later than it usually is, they run out of pollen in the hive, and then brood rearing shuts down. So we always give them at the end of March or the first week of April early. That's not early for you, I know, but early we give them pollen substitute patties, and and so that allows them to continue brood rearing until natural pollen is available. Once pollen is available here, they won't even look at the pollen substitute. As far as syrup goes, we only feed syrup in the spring if they need it. If they're in danger of running out of feed, we'll give them syrup. We always feed 2 to 1, 2 sugar to 1 water. I never feed 1 to 1. I can't see if a colony needs food, why you would feed anything that's half water, you know. So, and I'm not trying to stimulate them with 1 to 1 syrup in the spring like some people do. We get enough of a nectar flow early enough, and the colonies are well provisioned in the autumn, so that they're still packed with honey in the spring. So I don't stimulatively feed syrup.
Another question, you didn't mention disease control. What chemicals do you use? Or, I mean, someone else on another question has said they've been looking at non-chemical Varroa treatment, and one of the approaches being promoted is heat treatment, you know. And have you, well, I think people are asking, what do you use? What do you recommend?
For disease control, of course, American foul brood is the match. Match works 100%. You burn it. European foul brood isn't a reportable disease here. We are allowed to use terramycin if we need to. I don't, under normal circumstances, use that. I did get an outbreak in my brood factories, and if you get a European in the brood factories, that eliminates the brood factories from being able to produce brood for cell builders or for nucleus colonies. So with a veterinary feed directive, we are allowed to use terramycin under for limited reasons, but no, we don't use it wholesale. There's no way, you know. And then chalk brood, of course, it's about hygienic bees, except for American foul brood. Hygienic bees will just clean the brood nest right out, and so you know you can really stay ahead of diseases. Brood diseases.
Anything for Varroa control then?
As far as Varroa control, I've tried everything.
And what are you doing this year then?
It's tough. It is tough. I don't know. Right now we're using Amatraz. You know, I don't really know what else there is. I've tried formic acid in a number of ways, and the mites sit there going like this. I've tried oxalic acid in a number of ways and vaporizing, and the trouble with vaporizing here is by the time the colony is broodless, it's cold here, and the clusters are tight, and the vapors don't penetrate the cluster to get at the varroa mites, and so it really doesn't work very well. So breeding is the right way to go. If you have a program over there that's got a varroa sensitive hygiene program, I think there is now. I think it's started.
No. I mean, on a slightly different, Roger said, we've introduced a national bee improvement program in the UK to try to reduce the importation of queens, as you commented on, because obviously the queens we buy in don't suit our weather conditions. So he says, how do you suggest we get beekeepers to raise queens from the best local stock? How can we persuade them?
I would say by example.
Yeah.
So if you can get a number of people in the club or that they can be exposed to, you can show them how they went from mediocre, average to exceptional.
Yeah.
Just by selecting from good stock and setting up proper cell builders and with nutrition and nurse bees and like that. I think that's what helps. And sometimes it does take a club project. But when I first started talking about nucleus colonies, it was way back in maybe 06. I was in Massachusetts, and I was winging it. I didn't have a PowerPoint. I didn't know anything about PowerPoint. And so here's the line of old men in the front row. I'm telling them about wintering nucleus colonies and how this, and they're all looking at me and shaking their heads. No, we know better. You can't do that. You need to have X number of pounds of bees, and the cluster has to be big enough to have a shell of certain proportions. And oh, come on.
Okay.
But who listened? The new beekeepers. And who went out and tried it? The new beekeepers.
Yes.
And now the old beekeepers are saying, where the hell did you get all those bees? Well, I grew them in nucleus colonies. Really? The next time I went back to that club, the old men are still sitting in the front, but they're all ears.
So really we need to start.
I think the example is the best.
Okay, yeah. And start with the people who, the people of first or second year out of learning as well. Yeah.
So, or somebody that's been struggling and buying bees every year, and the bees die every year and they're rubbish all the time. And then they see
about
this.
14 more questions. So they may all just be saying wonderful, thank you. But can I just say to everybody, Mike has taken the afternoon off, so I am planning to stop in a little while and then have a break, and then if anybody's still here, that we'll break into smaller rooms, or so you can ask maybe more individual questions if you want to. So do you have a problem with overstocking of bees in certain areas as we do here in the UK?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. You put too many cows in a pasture and none of them could do any good.
Is that where you are? Is that the same where you are?
Absolutely. If you put too many bees in one location and have too many locations around too close to each other, the production goes down significantly.
And where sort of in Vermont, do you know where all the beekeepers are?
No, because some hide them. We have a registration here. We have to pay $10 per apiary, and that goes to the inspection program. And if we don't register, and then we get because of our registration, the commercials that have more than 15 hives in a yard get a 2-mile commercial zone. So nobody else can put an out yard within 2 miles of a registered commercial yard. Of course, you could put as many on your own property as you want. But sure, people hide them all the time, and people cheat on the thing, and
that must be worrying. So someone has said they're amazed. You mentioned how much honey. I mean, I don't think you have talked about it for this year, but what is your local forage? I think I can't remember how many you said the pounds of honey. So what would they have been foraging from?
We usually produce between 25 and 30 ton.
Okay.
From 600 to 700 colonies.
Yeah. Okay. And how much help do you have, Mike?
Right now I have 3 employees.
Okay, is that
I had
normal?
5
Or-
I had 5 last year, but
Oh.
because of COVID, one lived in Florida and one lived in the state of Georgia. Both are overrun with COVID. So I just sort of said, well, maybe you ought to stay there this year, because we didn't want them. My wife's got a lung disease and I'm compromised, and we know we don't need any of that. So
Careful,
we
yeah,
can isolate naturally. We're beekeepers.
yeah.
And so we don't go anywhere without a mask and disinfectant. And so
Mm.
thank God so far, our state of Vermont has got the lowest incidence and the lowest totals of anywhere in the union.
Mhm.
So
So do you still feel as enthusiastic as you know when you first started?
absolutely. I'm over 70. I'm getting my Social Security and I don't want to stop.
Oh, okay, that's
Why
good.
would I stop? And we just got a government grant, $30,000 grant to work with the new Vermont Bee Lab and to try to select colonies that are more VSH, more hygienic,
Yeah.
better breeding stock. So anyway, we'll see. I'm trying to get some of that stock that's in Hawaii right now that's being touted as being so Vermont sensitive. So I don't know. They only want to release it to the boys in the club,
Yeah, yeah. So I think Irma, so she said you inspired her to set up her local queen raising. So she
Yeah.
thanks you for that. And then
Great.
she says, how do you deal with neighbors that don't treat their bees?
That's an issue. That really is an issue. And if they're not going to, there's nothing you can do except make sure that you sample your bees often enough, after your before it's too late again in the fall, because we're getting drift. And so you clean your colonies, you clear your colonies of pretty well of varroa mites, and then, gosh, before winter, all of a sudden you've got a huge population again.
Mm, mm.
So that's you need to stay on top of it. I don't know. Talk to your neighbors. I mean, but there's so many people that think that they're going to save the bees and they're going to have 5 hives in their backyard and they're never going to treat for anything.
Mhm.
And the mother nature and time will take, and Darwin and all of that, that'll take care of it. Well, it isn't working.
Okay.
And I believe me, I'm totally for breeding. I am, but it isn't working. It works for chalkroot. It
Mhm.
worked for tragular mites, acarapis. It works for so many things. It has not worked for varroa mites. 30
And-
years, it hasn't worked. So we're working. We're still trying.
okay. I think Irma sounds like she's quite close to you. She said, how did you deal with this year's drought?
Yes, she sounds like there was. Well, we got as I said, we super before dandelion.
Okay.
And so there was plenty of moisture in the ground for dandelion. And so they filled almost 2 supers out of the dandelion fruit bloom. And then after that, the drought took over and they didn't really make anything until later in the summer. So about middle of June. So we had about a month of real drought. About the middle to the end of June, we must have got enough moisture and something yielded. And I know basswood yielded because they have deep roots. And so we actually we made some beautiful comb honey. We made over 20 tons this year, and lower than us. So it's probably 25% down the total crop. Of course, last year was a huge crop.
All right.
So you got to pay sometime. So.
To be honest, she goes on to say she's really pleased that you're in the grant program. She says it gives her hope. So I think
Yeah.
she sounds like she's in your back.
It gives me hope too. That's what's going to keep me in this.
Yeah.
I could stop now.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to, but
It's difficult.
So I think that's at least another 3 years I'm going to be in it. So there.
Well, everybody, I think that's the end of the questions that I've been asked.
Okay.
So I am proposing it's 8:35. If Mike has said he's up for this, so hopefully. So I propose that we. She's from Maine. Irma's from Maine.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I propose that we have a 5-minute break and people go off and get a cup of tea or something. And if you're back here in 5 minutes, then I will think that you want to stay. And I will put us into breakout rooms, of which Mike will be able to pop in and out, or if I put them in for 10 minutes, well, I'll talk about it when I come back.
Right.
So it'll give you an opportunity to meet other beekeepers and possibly meet Mike, and Richard will hang around too. So you can ask lots of questions, and maybe Roger will hang around. Talk about the bee improvement program. But anyway, so as I said, so it's 8:36 now on my watch. So shall we say at 1:45 we back here?
Okay.
If you're here, then
Yep.
and no, Mike, oh, you've gone. I was about to say,
I'll be right. I'm right here.
okay, everyone, do you want to tell me, anybody, if everyone's going, I think we should thank Mike for this. He's been absolutely brilliant. And I think, can you unmute yourself, and we'll give him a big clap, because, you know, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
So I'll see you back in about, well, 5-6 minutes or something.
Very good. I'll be right back.